Are you searching for a deeper understanding of your faith?
Inspiring Philosophy is your go-to resource for exploring the rich tapestry of Christian thought.
From biblical archaeology to philosophy of mind, we dive into the topics that matter.
Our content bridges faith and understanding, offering insights into God's existence and the reliability of the New Testament.
Join a community where faith meets reason and discover the answers you've been seeking.
Inspiring Philosophy, where faith meets understanding.
Erase the name. Now every idol sounds the same. A generation on its knees, begging comfort, killing peace. Oh, this is the price of pride, dancing while the truth just dies. We fear the cross, embrace the chain. Our freedom's just another cage. In the ruins, a whisper stands, scarred and radiant, pierced hands. The silence breaks, the dark retreats. The king returned and thunder breaks. Where the last light fading under broken skies, chasing meaning in electric lights. But grace still burns where shadows fall. The dead arise, he conquers all. Take one last breath before the dawn takes back the
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to Inspiring Philosophy. Caleb had his camera off. Were you just worried that the ugliness would get everybody for that split second, but now, or what was happening?
Yeah, it was like a jump scare, I didn't want to, I wanted it to be like a surprise where it's like, oh, you see Than, but then you just have the new and improved version. So
Yeah,
that's
fair
what it
enough.
was,
Fair
yeah.
enough.
No, I'm glad to be here though.
Well, Caleb, you've been here before when Mike's not here. So, what is the rule when Mike's gone?
There are no rules.
Heck yeah, brother. Heck yeah. All right, so let's just kind of get into this right away. We're gonna cover miracles today. And we're just gonna go over a few verified cases. We should probably just define what we mean by verified, I guess, there too. But go over cases, take your guys' questions. Caleb, did you have any goals for today as far as what you want to accomplish?
Yeah, that's a good question. I would say just to go over, first of all, like establishing sort of the argument for miracles in terms of theoretically, right? So how would we, in principle, study a miracle or examine it, right? How would we determine that it's probably a miracle and not just something we don't know? And then are there any actual examples, even if we could grant that hypothetically we could observe one, right? So that's kind of, I think, the approach to go about it would be method and then evidence.
Nice. My slides don't actually have the method stuff on there.
Yeah.
Do you want to bring up some of your slides for the Lambertini criteria and all that? kind of
Yeah,
stuff?
let me see if I have
As you're
them
pulling
on
that
there.
up, why don't you just
Yeah.
actually tell people who you are on the off chance they don't know? Caleb, you have an upcoming book. One of the reasons why I haven't been pushing the argument for miracles the last 2 years is because I've been waiting for your book to come out. I got tired of waiting.
I know, as am I, but I know I'm kind of a perfectionist. So yeah, I'm Than's friend Caleb. No, so I'm a writer, just a Christian hobbyist, but I've been friends with Than for a good while now. Been on multiple shows, been on Inspiring Philosophy, Capturing Christianity, Trinity Ready, all that fun stuff. So trying to get my networking out there. But yeah, I've been studying the argument from miracles now for many years. I think it's going on 5 now. And working on this pretty big monograph on it. Wanted to specifically focus on medically documented stuff. So yeah, I've written multiple articles that are on my academia that are a bit more technical. I also now have a Substack as of the last few months. Some of the articles are now on there as well, but I'm working on other stuff. So that's why the book's been a little bit delayed. But it's having to balance the stuff you're putting out publicly versus stuff you're working on privately that will eventually be public. So it's a lot, but I think it'll be good. And I've made a lot of friends along the way and learned a lot of things. So really happy to be
Awesome.
here and to sort of make this argument more popular. And I think that's what you and I both sort of share, that passion to say that we have this sort of old generation of apologetics where we're focusing sort of on like minimal facts, resurrection stuff, and the Kalam cosmologic argument. And that's not to say that those are bad arguments per se. Well, maybe you think the minimal facts one is, but even if we put that aside, I think that there's just new stuff that we can be talking about and getting it really into the 21st century and talking about stuff that hasn't been discussed. Because the argument for miracles, if you look at surveys that Phil Papers and other things like that do among philosophers, it's usually the least talked about one. Usually it's just talking about Hume. Very little has been published comparatively. There's more published on the ontological argument and Pascal's wager than there is on miracles in terms of the philosophy of religion literature. And it's only really been stuff that's like been medically documented. That's really only been popularized in like the second half of the 20th century. And really mostly even in the 2010s, to be honest with you, is when a good portion of it sort of had a resurgence, but it's only been discussed for a few decades. And even then, not all that much. So I think just contributing to that and getting the conversation started in the popular level is really important. And I think that's what you and I are both trying to do with that. Because I think it's a really strong argument.
A good way to surmise everything you just said, Caleb, is that future is now, old man meme.
Right, exactly. So
You got those slides coming up?
Yeah, I do. Let me see if I can.
Speaking of old
share
man.
it. Yeah, I know technology like old man. All right, let's see. Share screen. Share screen. All right, I have a couple different presentations. I'm having to jump through slides, but
I have so many of them.
Story of my life, right? Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, why is that on there now? Okay, cool. So the Lambertini criteria, that is not just a cool name that I came up with. It actually comes from a cardinal from the 18th century, Prospero Lambertini, who would eventually become Pope Benedict XIV. So he kind of modernized the modern process by which the Catholic Church investigates miracles. Now, this is not just for Catholics, obviously, but the Catholic Church has just been around a lot longer. So they've had a bit of history doing this. In order to be a Catholic saint, you usually have to have at least 2 miracles after your death. It used to be up to 4, but they changed that in the 20th century. And so this is how they investigate that with like a panel doctor. So I think we can take this criteria and apply it to any kind of case of answered prayer when it comes to a disease specifically. And I think studying diseases is also like the most effective. I'm sorry, studying the way that prayer affects ailments is probably the best way to look at miracles, because you don't really have to invent new methods for doing that. We already know in medicine how to determine whether someone is sick and whether someone is not sick anymore. We're not reinventing the wheel here. Case reports are very common in medicine, and it's harder to do that, I think, in the other natural sciences. So that's why I'm generally more confident in some of the healing stuff than I am about like, apparitions or like really improbable coincidences of answered prayer and stuff like that. Doesn't mean that it's not interesting, but it's harder to investigate. So with that being said, how would we investigate a healing miracle, right? I've added a few of these on here or adjusted some of Lambertini's criteria. He originally had 7. I have about 10. So one is that it's medically documented. So that one's pretty straightforward, preferably both the cure and the disease. The cure and the ailment are medically documented. And it's organic, which means that it's not psychosomatic. So people can get symptoms of illnesses even if they don't always have something physically wrong with them, right? Stress especially can cause you to have high blood pressure, or even in extreme cases like vision problems or like slight paralysis or this feeling of paralysis. So we have to make sure that someone isn't influenced sort of by the placebo effect. It has to be something that's really there, like a tumor, like a broken bone, like a genetic condition, something that we can verify with tests that's not purely in someone's head, right? Because then it can't really be affected by suggestion as much. Progressive illness is also something that's very important. It's something that was getting worse over time, or at least plateaued. It wasn't getting better. If someone was already getting better prior to being prayed for, then you could say maybe there was some natural mechanism that was already working, right? So if they were already getting much worse and then suddenly they get better, that's much less likely just to happen with remission than it would be for it to be something that happens, gradually and improvingly in a very serious ailment. So we're not talking about just people who have headaches or slight back pain. This is something that's severely disabling, life-threatening even, because that gives us a good metric to determine how complete their cure was, right? If someone is like dependent on a walking cane, or they're blind and they have to have glasses, or they're dependent on medications, if they're healed enough to where they can get rid of those things, then that's a pretty determinative way to say, okay, they're like clearly much better. But if it's something that's kind of mild, where like, yeah, if you really willed up yourself, you could get over the pain, like it's harder to determine whether or not that's psychological or not. All right, so those are the conditions for the disease. What about the cure? The cure is religiously correlated. Obviously, for a miracle to happen, I think you have to establish that. So they didn't just happen to get better randomly, right? They were usually prayed for is the most common one, but maybe they went to a religious shrine, they had a religious vision, something like that. But it needs to happen like that. And it needs to be unprecedented in the sense that it's not something that happens like regularly. At least it's uncommon. So, praying for a parking space, right? Although that maybe you could happen to have that happen immediately after prayer.
Praying for Caleb's book to come out.
Yeah, exactly, right, which would be unprecedented. It would be something that would still be something that happens a lot of times without prayer, right? So this needs to be something that would be very unlikely to happen on its own in that sense. So it's why if you can find cases where no one else has been cured of this particular disease, and I think most of the cases we're going to talk about today fall under that, where you really can't find any other case of this happening in the way that it did, that's pretty good evidence that it's not something that's just like common naturally that would go away. The cure is permanent, doesn't relapse. That one's pretty obvious. Instantaneous, I think this is one of the most important ones, and it's correlated with the religion one, right? So if someone is instantly healed at the moment of prayer, or very, very shortly afterwards, like overnight, within a few hours or minutes, that's really what I think establishes the causal aspect, right? So if you're taking a drug and you immediately show symptoms after taking that drug, then you could say there's a causal relationship there. Not always. Depends on the case and depends on if there's underlying conditions, but that's one effective thing, right? If you take a drug in a trial and then you don't have any like symptoms until like months later, and it was like a one-time thing, it's a little bit harder to establish whether it was caused or not. So if it happens immediately after prayer, it seems much more cut and dry in terms of the prayer probably had something to do with the remission. It wouldn't just be a coincidence. Complete, that was kind of already correlated with serious, right? They're much better. They didn't just have a slight improvement. They're now no longer disabled, or they're no longer life-threatening, right? And then spontaneous, which means it's not attributable to treatment. If they had treatment at all, it was palliative. It was not meant to cure it. It was meant to just improve their quality of life. But you couldn't say realistically they got better because of any kind of medicine or surgery, whatever they had, because that defeats the whole purpose of a miracle, right? So I think those are reasonable criteria, and I think those are something that most people, skeptic or believer, should be able to agree on they're pretty religiously neutral here. We're not saying it has to be done in the name of Jesus or they have to go to the Pope or anything like that, right? These seem like fairly any religion should be able to agree with these criteria.
Yeah. No, I know. I love it. There's a bunch of other methodological considerations you can even put into this, but I'm not going to go dorky Bayes mode on this right now. So before we do that real quick, I'm just going to take care of the super chats right away. And the greatest Christian miracle is no, Mike.
So mean.
Guys, clip that, and then send it to Mike. We're going to... Jack Ray with the 5 memberships. Thank you. Yes. Nutrition beast.
I think that's you.
Is that Caleb? Caleb,
you're definitely nutrition beast. Come on. Look at those biceps.
Oh man. All right. Okay, so I have some slides we can go over. You have slides we can go over. Do you want to, the first case that I have is the juvenile macular degeneration one. Do you think that's a good one to start things off with?
Yeah, I think we can start with some of the GMRI ones and go from there.
Okay.
Yeah, why not?
Share screen. Boop, boop, boop. Where is it? Here we go. Okay. So this is in a peer-reviewed journal, by the way, guys, too. You can find it at GMRI. So in 1959, an 18-year-old woman, white of Dutch ancestry, the wife of a pastor, began losing her central vision. It vanished over 3 months. First the left eye, then 2 months later, the right, each over just 2 or 3 days. So she was diagnosed with juvenile macular degeneration. In 1960, the big thing to note is that her uncorrected vision was 7/200 in each eye. Finger counting, she was legally blind. She went to a school for blind people. Is there anything else you want to add in about this, Caleb?
Yeah, I will just say macular degeneration is just where the macula, which is a central part of the eye, starts to degenerate, right? And normally this happens with age. So age-related macular degeneration is the most common one. Juvenile means it's probably hereditary. There's a genetic component when you get it when you're really young. So getting it at 18 is pretty rare unless it's a genetic disorder. She did have a sister who was a twin who didn't have this, but it's not always the case that they have to inherit it in the same way. Yeah, I would point out for the viewers too, one thing is that 20/200 is legal blindness. And that's been corrected. So she wasn't able to have any glasses that were going to fix this, right? She was 20/200 with the correction too. So that pretty severely impaired, right? So you're right. She had to have a cane to walk. She was taken to the administration of the School of the Blind in Arkansas. I believe it was in the 1960s primarily. And she had this for 10 years. So think about those criteria that we listed at the beginning, right? It's an organic disease. We know it's organic because her ophthalmologist noticed what's called a stocktoma in the eye, like a black spot where you could sort of see the degradation going, right? So this is not something that's purely in her head, nor would it happen where one eye would suddenly go out and the other one wouldn't, the timing of it. And she had this for 10 years. And if you look at the records again, it's one of those where it drops in acuity and then it kind of stays at 20/400 for like 10 years. And she had another, I don't know if you have another slide on this too. I'm sorry, it was 13 years.
That's before she gets.
Okay, yeah. So she had this, I believe her last test was, I want to say it was about a year before her healing or like several months before. And when they did that with finger counting, her eyesight had not improved, right? So the point is when she's first diagnosed, we have her acuity, we have a follow-up test, and we have a follow-up test that's like relatively close to when she's cured. And we can see that in that period, there's no improvement. So this wasn't like she could have gradually gotten better and only noticed that she got better after she was prayed for, right? This is something that's like clearly stagnant and plateauing and that has no expectation of improving because typically eye diseases don't get better when it's severe because the eye has different cells in other parts of the body and they can't regenerate in the same way. So usually that kind of disease is incurable. Even today, by the way, this was back in the 70s. They definitely had no treatments back then. But even today, it's almost impossible to treat this in an effective way. You can get improvements, but nothing that would be an absolute cure. So
yeah. And then in August 1972, Caleb, what happens?
So a couple of things. She actually goes, this part's actually not in the paper, but I remember Josh Brown mentioning it. They go to a faith healing conference by evangelist Catherine Kuhlman, who we'll mention later. And nothing happens there, right? So they go there expecting a healing. nothing happens. She comes back disappointed. They're driving back from that. They get home. Her husband's a pastor, and obviously she's bummed, right? So her husband's like, well, let's try one more time. And as they're going to bed, he says a final prayer for God to restore her eyesight. By the way, I can say her name's Marilyn Ford. It's not like I'm doxing her. It's public information. So just so I don't have to keep referring to her anonymously this whole time. So he prays for Marilyn as they're doing that. As she opens up her eyes, she can finally see his face for the first time. And she obviously is like ecstatic. And she's looking up and she's like, I can see that. I can see that. He goes and she asks him to grab a newspaper, and he does. And he asks if she can read the title. And she says, oh, I can read more than just the title. I can read the small font. And she does. And she says that was the first time she'd actually seen her husband's face. She got married after she went blind, like clearly. And her kid's face as well, right? She'd only seen them as blurry.
Yeah.
So it was very emotional for her. But she claims that instantaneously at that moment that she got her eyesight back. And remember, they were at a conference earlier that day, and she did not get healed then. So I don't think you could say this is purely expectation, because there was expectation other places that it didn't work. So that's one thing. But yeah, if you had any other comments on that.
No, this one is one of those cases. There's a few of these cases like this that actually kind of get me emotionally too, man. Because like,
yeah.
Just imagine living your life like that, and then just in an instant, you can see your husband's face, your kids' faces.
Yeah.
And I can't even begin to process what that would be like.
Yeah, it's beautiful. So she goes, and again, some of this is not in the paper, but it's in interviews that she's given and books that she's written. So shortly after that, I want to say it was probably like a few weeks after. Well, she calls her. So that night she calls her doctor, and her doctor's like really confused, but he tells her just to calm down, and he's kind of worried that this might be like a temporary sort of weird fluke, weird remission, and he's just not sure it's going to be permanent. So she goes a few weeks, no changes in her eyesight, still good. She goes to her ophthalmologist, and we don't have records of this, unfortunately, because I think they just were not preserved well, given that it was in the 70s. But she says that when she went back to her doctor a few weeks after that, her eyesight measured normally, it was functional, but her actual eye was still degraded. And that was kind of confusing, because it's like she didn't be able to have the vision she was, because it's like her cells weren't there, the macula was degenerated, and yet she still had relatively normal acuity, or at least significantly improved acuity. So I believe it was 2 years after that's when we officially have like other records when she did a follow-up one. And that one showed that her eyesight had improved drastically to 20/100 in each eye. Now that's still relatively impaired, but that's also uncorrected. And that's really not like that. In fact, I think my eyesight uncorrected is probably that, if not worse, to be honest. I wear contacts, and you have glasses too. I don't know what yours is, but for people who have like severe nearsightedness and stuff like that, it's not that uncommon nowadays, especially with screens, for people to have really bad uncorrected eyesight. But uncorrected is not really relevant, because nowadays it's very easily correctable. So my eyesight with contacts is 20/20. Without it is probably like 20/100 at least. So basically, someone who was formerly legally blind probably has eyesight that's like close to my equivalency. So, or maybe slightly worse. When she got her corrected vision, I believe was like 20/40, which is almost perfect. So, you go from 20/400 to 400 uncorrected to 20/100 uncorrected versus 20/40 corrected, which is pretty incredible. That's a 400% increase or whatever. So mind you, again, this is a disease that is irreversible. It's not something that would just go away on its own. She had not had like a gradual improvement before this. Not that that would even really be physically possible. There's not a mechanism that would explain that. But even if you were granting that, it happened seemingly instantaneous.
It's just an unknown natural law.
Yeah, well, we can get into that in a little bit when we get to the explanations things. But so they followed up with her. This happened in 1971, follow-ups in 72. They did other follow-ups in, I think, 2001, 2011. At that point, she had cataracts, which is normal for people who get older, right? It was unrelated to her previous disease. And so they did that. But when they did rescans of her eyes, these are more recently, as you said, 47 years later, her eyes were normal outside of the cataracts and just age-related things, but nothing from her original genetic disease, which is, again, incredible that this is something that's lasted that long. So you go from organic disease, 10 years, no improvement, instantly report getting better, confirmation within a short period of time after that it has significantly improved, and that maintains for 40 years without relapsing. And normally when you get older, your eyes get worse. They wouldn't stay the same. So
that's the real miracle.
Yeah. So it's pretty incredible that even happened. And so you really can't find anything in the literature, to my knowledge, or to anyone else's, about this, right? Or of this kind of anything remarkably close to this. In fact, the only case I know, or only like one or two cases I know where this has happened were in other religious cases. So there's a guy named Greg Spencer who had a very similar one with juvenile macular degeneration that also instantly healed. But that was during prayer at a men's conference. So I don't think that's going to be a good naturalistic parallel. That's the one you want to use. So it is kind of suspicious that all these really incredible, dramatic healings of these kinds of things that are unparalleled happen in religious settings. I don't know if there's a correlation for a reason for that, but just something to point out. So I think that's pretty remarkable. And I think if you go through, I know James Fedor did a video years ago now talking about some of the Jim R cases. And I think from what I recall, I'd have to rewatch it. He criticized some of the diagnosis, but even if you do that, if you're granting she had some organic eye disease that was unimproved for 10 years, there's no example that, to my knowledge, of anything remotely like that instantly going away and staying that long. So you're gonna have to posit something very ad hoc and very speculative that we just don't have any real reason to suspect is real. So I think this is one of many cases that's really compelling.
Yeah. And I'm just putting in some other pictures of the medical documentation that has been preserved. The paper will actually have like a supplementary document if you guys ever go to it. And the supplementary document will actually translate everything, because you guys know the common trope. This is hieroglyphics because the doctor wrote it. But yeah, we got the medical documentation and everything with this case. So
I like how you have all of those too.
Yeah. So did you want to cover that at all, Caleb? Or
yeah, so I think I alluded to it a little bit. So I think conversion disorder, which would be basically something that would be psychosomatic, I think we can rule that out because it would not have lasted that long. We can observe objective features of the eye that were degraded, right? Mind you, remember, she went back to the doctor after she was healed, and they still said that like the eye was like damaged, and yet she could still see despite of that. So couldn't be. I don't think you could say it was like there was nothing wrong with her eyes. Placebo effect is not going to get you that effect. I think we've done studies on placebos with juvenile macular degeneration, and it's very little effective at all. It barely makes a difference. You can't just say a placebo effect explains like any and all recoveries, right? Placebo effects like can temporarily like make pain go away and make
the placebo effect is like the non-religious analog of a miracle happened.
It's basically a magic wand to just that and spontaneous remission, which is also on there. It's just the word to just like say it could be anything, right?
Yeah.
But obviously placebos have limitations. You're not going to get a broken bone healed or a tumor going away from the placebo effect. You're not going to get degenerated cells in the eye to grow back from the placebo effect or have anywhere near that one, right? So just find me a case where you have someone who had 20/400 vision or equivalent of that, who then purely psychologically got up to 20/100 and corrected. I don't think there's anything like that. And I've looked in the literature quite a bit so far as I know. Malingering, which is just the idea that she was faking it. I mean, again, objective damage to the eye, and don't know what the motivation would be because clearly she was disabled and all this other stuff like that. So I think that has virtually zero plausibility. And spontaneous remission, again, we have no other examples of this happening outside of religious context. Of this spontaneous remission doesn't even make sense because there's not a mechanism that doesn't make sense of how the macula could even build itself back in that way. People act as if spontaneous remission is like meant to be a cause or a mechanism. Like they say, oh, the cancer went away because of spontaneous remission. That's actually a misnomer. In the literature, spontaneous remission just means that a disease went away without like treatment, right, or effective treatment. It doesn't say why it went away. So you can have spontaneous remissions that are unknown, and you can also have some that we can speculate, like some cancers we might know because of infections and stuff like that. But just saying a spontaneous remission is just saying the disease went away without treatment. That doesn't actually explain it, right? Usually people mean like the body can heal itself. But again, in this case, we have good reasons to think like that wouldn't happen. They're going to be gradual, wouldn't be instantaneous. There's no other example of this happening. It wouldn't be plausible with this kind of cells in the eye, et cetera, et cetera. So I think for all those reasons, we can rule out basically every other one option. So this is at least a case that the natural should grant is medically inexplicable. Even if we don't have to get to the cause just yet, we can at least say we can rule out these other causes and hold off on what our cause we might want to postulate could be.
Yeah. Well, I think I know what cause I would postulate, which would be, Jesus is alive and still working.
You just mean you're Sky Daddy because I don't know, therefore God, right? That's
exactly. It has nothing to do with the religious context or anything like that,
No.
or particular or theism, none of that.
No, you can't make inferences to causes based off of data. You have to prove that the cause exists. You can't have a hypothesis with hypothetical mechanisms. You have to prove it first. Don't you know how the scientific method works then? I'm saying this
Yep.
obviously in jest for the audience, but like people will say
Yeah.
that too, where it's like you can't posit. Again, we can maybe wait till we get to the end of this. If like you can't posit the supernatural until you first demonstrate the supernatural exists. I think Dillahunty has said something like that. And that's like backwards in terms of how the scientific method works. Like, no, you have your theory and then you test your theory to find out if you're right. You don't just get to assume, you don't have to prove that your theory is right before you test it. That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And Caleb, and I mean, here, you probably already know what I'm experiencing as I'm trying to popularize and push the argument for miracles lately. The amount of really, really silly objections.
Right.
It's insane. Which is one of the reasons I'm actually really excited to tell you guys too, by the way. Like there will be miracle videos, like long form videos coming out where we go in depth on certain cases. But one of the things I want to do is actually just like straight up just give a methodological thing. So basically it's, hey, here's the methodology for talking about miracle cases. And here's all the categories of objections you're going to get with all these cases. Here's why they suck for the most part. Then there might be some good objections that come up depending on like if they're actually going to contest the data. But most of the time they just come down to somebody was lying, it was a misdiagnosis, unknown natural law. That's really what it just comes down to at the end of the day is.
Yeah. And I'll just say when you have these shared features, I feel like the more
Shaitan is trying to stop us. Look at this.
Out?
Yeah, but you're good now. What were you going to say? Features?
Yeah, no. Oh, okay. I'm back now. Yeah. No, I was going to say, I think when you look at these cumulatively too, it's like if you're going to posit misdiagnosis, it's like the probability of like misdiagnosis happening and then the person gets better after prayer immediately and then it's like permanent. Like I feel like you're going to have to posit doctors are just like horribly incompetent with the number of times this would have to happen with these like features. You know, I'm not saying misdiagnosis doesn't happen, but that's also another thing I'd point out too is misdiagnosis does not actually explain the recovery, right? It's objecting to maybe some of the features, but suppose that someone's like paralyzed and there's debate whether they have cerebral palsy or like multiple sclerosis or a different kind of like ALS or something, right? There's technical debates you can get of how to diagnose each of those, but suppose we weren't sure. We knew it was some kind of nerve damage and some kind of neurological disease, but we weren't sure entirely which one it was, right? If someone was horribly paralyzed, severely paralyzed for years, and we had all those criteria, it was progressive, right? And then instantly they were healed permanently. It doesn't really matter which of those you posit because none of those would explain it. None of those kinds of diseases go away instantly, permanently, et cetera, when it's progressive and all that stuff, right? And organic. So even if you said we're not sure exactly what the diagnosis was in this case, but we can say like the family of disease it was, the category it was, nothing within that category that we know of would go away in the way that the Lambertini criteria require it to. So it wouldn't actually explain away. You could grant, we don't know which one it is, but none of them would explain it. So I'll just point that out as well. I would just want to press them of what are you proposing the actual disease was or that like what happened, because just objecting to certain data points doesn't actually give you a better explanation, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Matt Dillahunty isn't convinced, so it didn't happen. Shoot.
Is that Richard Carrier? Richard Carrier's pigeon.
It's Richard Carrier's pigeon.
Oh, that's funny.
It's a pigeon with Richard Carrier's head photoshopped on it.
Have you seen Richard Carrier's blogs on miracles? I know you probably haven't because you don't want to kill yourself, but I'm sorry.
Dude, I've read his books on the historicity of Jesus, and I don't want to do anything else.
On Bayes, it's like, oh gosh, the way that he.
Yeah. No,
I mean, it's one of those where it's like his use of Bayes. I don't want to get into Richard Carrier, but like there's definitely a bias against like the supernatural and like the way people use that. I know Raphael Ladouceur, who Carrier's friends with and is also a mythicist, right? At one point, he objects to a passage in Acts where the angel kills Herod, right? And we know that Herod died because Josephus mentioned it too in a similar way. But Luke mentions an angel. And Ladouceur says, given that angels are mythical creatures, we can say with high confidence that this did not happen, or that Luke is making this up. And it's like, wow, way to show your just cards there in terms of just saying, well, yeah, angels don't exist. So like, obviously this didn't happen, you know, if you're just going to use that as a method. So.
Yeah. If we grant 1, Catholic-specific vindicatory miracles, and 2, infallible Catholic contradictions, any effect on conclusions drawn from miracles?
Oh, are we back now?
Oh, you were gone. Okay, sorry.
I am.
If we grant 1, Catholic-specific vindicatory miracles, and 2, infallible Catholic contradictions, any effect on conclusion drawn from miracles. So I'm just assuming what you're really asking here, Koopa, is if we have Catholic indexed miracles, but we have if you assume we have reasons to think that Catholicism is false, what does that do? I would just take that to be a vindication of Christianity then.
Yeah.
If you assume to.
If you're granting to, I mean, this is where it's really hard. And I get this question, Than knows this. Like I get this question a lot because Catholics are the ones who are starting to use this argument more, which is fine. But it is hard to sort of get to the implications of that, right? And I think we all have our dispositions. So I agree with Than that I think a lot of this is definitely vindicatory of Christianity because these do happen across denominations. It is a bit trickier when you get like really specific Catholic doctrines like purgatory or the Immaculate Conception out of some of these
Catherine doctrines.
Catholic doctrine. I probably did say Catherine, and I'm just slurring my speech right now. But it's like Michael Jones after a few beers, I guess. I'm kidding. I didn't drink this, but anyway, so yeah, you have some doctrines like purgatory, the Immaculate Conception, or the intercession of saints, which are very Catholic specific. So it's kind of hard for me to square of like, okay, like how does a Protestant interpret those broadly, right? But without getting too much in the weeds too, I think with any of these, you have to balance how convincing the evidence is versus how speculative I think our objections might be. Like take, for example, the Trinity, which the Muslims object to all the time, right? Or the incarnation. Those do get very complicated and very nuanced, but I think if the evidence for Christianity is strong enough and the existence of God is strong enough, you can take that by revelation to say like, look, yes, there are some things we're not going to know that God might reveal to us through scripture or whatever. And so maybe the empirical evidence is going to outweigh our speculations about metaphysics and identity, which philosophers can't even agree on, right? So I'm not sure if like the Trinity doesn't make sense as a good defeater for really strong empirical evidence of the supernatural, or for Christianity specifically. So I don't know if Than would agree with that, but I think generally speaking, we should put empirical data and really hard, solid data over sort of really speculative stuff about ethics or metaphysics that people have wide disparities on that might be easily resolvable if we had more data.
Yeah. I'm personally still working out like a model of how to discern if a miracle happening within a specific tradition is actually vindicating that tradition versus just a particular doctrine versus Christian or Christianity on the whole. There's a lot of different things that I don't know. There's just a lot of nuance there. So I'm still working through how to sort all that kind of stuff. And that's the only answer you're going to get out of me because I'm not going to tease out my denomination to you.
You're Jehovah's Witness, right? I think that's okay.
I'm a non-denominational Mormon.
He's a non-denominational Catholic, Mormon, Orthodox, Lutheran, Baptist, or something like that.
Yes. Nathan Strachan. How do you know the healing was instant apart from the testimony of Marilyn and her husband? Also, have you examined non-Christian miracle claims?
All right, I'll take the second one first. Yes. There's a few ones that I think are religious, but it's really hard to find good documentation for a lot of that because other religions like Islam or Hinduism are typically in countries where it's harder just to keep documentation of that kind of stuff, just because they're developing nations. So, I mean, maybe that's a reporting bias, but at the same time, God could definitely resolve that if he wanted to, right? So, yeah, I think you don't really have the same degree of documentation and sort of, verifiability where you have like, the Catholic Church, for example, has to have panels of doctors like before they approve any miracles. You don't have that kind of rigor in other cases. A lot of it's just anecdotal. So, yeah, there are some, I think there's a few that I think are interesting in like Hinduism, for example, that I don't have an easy explanation for, but cumulatively, I think the Christian ones are just so much stronger. In terms of the first one, I think Marilyn and her husband are primarily the sources for that. She also lists names of people who she called immediately afterwards and stuff like that. But I don't really see why that should be a problem or questionable in principle, right? Because we know that her eyesight, we can verify that at least I think it was a year later is when we have like solid records that her eyesight had improved. So it's consistent with what she says, right? But if the proposal was, well, maybe her eyesight actually wasn't instantaneous and it happened to get better in like a year's time, that seems very implausible to me because we do know we can establish with pretty high confidence that she was blind without improvement for at least 10 years, right? Because we have diagnosis, checkups, and I think up to a few months before healing was when it had not improved. So if you're going to posit that she suddenly got drastically better within that like 1 year time, and she just was not accurate in reporting that it was instantaneous, that just doesn't make any sense to me, because you wouldn't expect with that criteria of it being progressive, you wouldn't expect it to suddenly switch over after a decade and now start improving, right? Because again, as you get older, these usually get worse, and there's no real mechanism for how that would even be possible. So yeah, we have Marilyn's testimony, we have her husband's testimony, but what they're saying is consistent with the data that we have. And even if you discounted that, I don't think that would really be much of a solution.
I would also think that,
I
like,
see no reason to discount it.
yeah, I'd also think, the next day after, when somebody says I was healed and then starts living their life, it's really easy to tell when somebody's blind.
Yeah.
And I'm pretty sure a bunch of people would be like, weren't you just telling me you got healed? Why, what, you called all of us this night. Why are you acting like a person that's
well, and mind you, I don't know
blind?
how, I obviously know what Nathan's acuity is, but like ask anyone who has like glasses or contacts, right? Both Than has glasses. Than's probably not that strong. I have contacts, right?
I
Than,
just took my glasses off. I cannot read the words on my screen. And I'm
Than, if your
nearsighted.
eyesight instantly improved, and you were wearing your glasses, would you notice? Would you have to take your glasses off because it would suddenly, like, your prescription would be?
That and everybody that knows and interacts with me in everyday life would be like, where are your glasses?
Yeah, certainly you
You'd
would
assume
know.
probably that I had contacts on.
Yeah, right, exactly. So if you've ever tried someone else's prescription glasses on and you can immediately tell, oh, this is really uncomfortable, right? Anyone who has severely impaired vision who then suddenly doesn't, like, it's gonna, especially that drastic, right? It's not like it was a minor improvement. It was going from legally blind to 400% improvement. You're going to notice that, especially if you have like prescription glasses or something like that, So
Yeah.
I don't think it's plausible to say that like she just hadn't noticed it or something like that, because you're going to get very obvious like symptoms very quickly. So
Yeah. All right, one more, and then we'll get back to the cases. Could you do this same test again against Islam miracles? Okay. Here's the thing. These are
compose
these are
yourself,
the
man.
three these are the three miracle cases or categories of miracle cases I always hear with Muslims. Okay. Here's the first one. Okay. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to read it to you guys. I'm going to read it to you guys because my most recent miracle reel, a Muslim commented on it.
I'm sure it was very profound and well articulated.
It was this is in response to, and if you guys haven't seen the claim, it was the Sturts for you, Caleb. It's the Sturts one. So
Which we go over
two
in this
brothers.
guide, too.
Yeah, two brothers have a rare blood glucose disease. It's incurable, and they both get prayed for and healed. Two miracles. It's a double miracle. Okay, this is the Muslims' response. And our miracle in Islam is by far further greater and more spectacular, and it gives falsification tests to apply to the Quran because the Quran is our greatest miracle.
What is their falsification? I know it's the Quranic challenge, but what is their criteria?
Dude, this is like a whole book they wrote.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay, but so then they quote Surah 29:51. Is it not enough for them that we have sent down to you the book, which is rehearsed to them verily in its mercy and a reminder to those who believe? The challenge for the 10 surahs, 11:13 says, or do they say he invented it? Say, then bring 10 surahs like it that have been invented and call upon whomever you can besides Allah, if you should be truthful. So the argument is that if you can produce 10 chapters of equal literary merit to the Quran, that is how you falsify that the Quran is. What's
the criteria for literary merit?
Nobody knows.
Exactly. That's the point. I can give you specific. We just went over a very specific criteria in terms of like instantaneous, organic. We have that well established in medicine. I have no idea what it means, like, to produce something that's like it. Like, what is it? Okay. Like, does it have to be in Arabic? Does it have to be like, they can always just move the goalpost. That's why no one's accepted the challenge, because it doesn't even have falsified.
No, this is because your heart is just darkened against Islam. Okay.
Also, can you just imagine, maybe this is going to be a bit like new atheist to say, but like when you're looking at like these kinds of miracles that God's doing. Like, I understand that God would do something like blind, not blind, right? Paralyzed, like something that your average lay Christian who's not super well versed can see and believe, right? But to have this one where you have to have these really technical, like literary analyses, and the Arabic is in this way, and the number 9 is repeated, like something that you have to be sort of a scholar to understand, and all that stuff like that. It's like, how is that going to be appealing to the average person versus like, you know, leg, no leg, like amputee got leg back, right? It's like much more straightforward, I think. So
Yeah.
that's just
The
aesthetic.
second category of miracle is they're not miracles. It's, oh, I read had a recitation of the Quran happening, and cows started coming up to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Didn't Michael do a video where they played other music, and like cows approach? It depends on the kind of music that cows will come up with, various kinds of music, like polka or something too. It's not just the Quran.
Yeah, it's just stupid stuff like that.
Have you seen the one with the cat where the cats don't walk on it? And then David Wood gets his cat and it just steps all over it. It's like that.
Yeah. So
Don't
those are
forget the
categories
scientific
of-
miracles, though, Thane. Don't forget the universe stretching out, and
That's what I was going to say. And then the third category of miracles is what I would call the, well, how would anybody have known this miracle?
yeah, how would farmers have known about like rain cycles or anything like that? Like
How would
yeah.
people have known that sun sets in the murky water? How would have people known that camel piss heals everything?
Well, I don't know, but okay. Well, I guess Muhammad didn't know the age of consent though, psychologically, so clearly he doesn't know everything. But I'm sorry. I know you didn't want to make this an Islam bashing thing because you did that enough, but it's fine to do that.
No, I got triggered now.
I'm sorry. No, it is funny though, but no, you're right though. And like honestly, I mean, I don't think that I think that atheists are not all of them, but many of them are going to be stubborn no matter what. But I do think that if you were to give like hypothetically these two, like which would be more impressive to you, like a medically documented thing where someone's like verifiably healed immediately after prayer, or vague verses in a holy book that sort of kind of allude to things in science that may or may not be referring to that, and also vague criteria about reciting. Like I would imagine most people would say, oh yeah, the first one's obviously much more empirically impressive than the second.
Caleb, I mean, in my 6 years of doing this now, I've had plenty of Christians come to me say they have doubts,
Yeah.
but it's never been because of Islam. And I've had tons of I've had many atheists. I've had many atheists say theism is rational, and say of all the religions, Christianity is probably like the most rational. I've never heard any atheists really say that much positive stuff about Islam.
Yeah, I mean, case in point, there you go. That's that's probably means something, right?
Yeah. All right. Do you want to go over a case, or do you want to go over the Chris Gunderson one now?
Let's do Chris Gunderson, and we can do a different one on my ones. So, oh yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to tell people on our Inspiring Philosophy Academy channel, which is my old Exploring Reality channel. Caleb and I actually interviewed this guy, by the way. If you guys want to go see that out, it's under the streams. I forget where it is. I can go find it if you want. But yeah, we actually talked to this guy. I need to give him my number again. Anyway, sorry. Well, so this is in a journal too. So Caleb, anything you want to say like preliminaries before this, or
What? Just so the audience knows, is it true that didn't you call Marilyn Ford at one point briefly too, the blind woman who we talked about in the other case? Did you also briefly speak with her, or not? I thought you said you did a phone call with her at one point.
I've talked to a bunch of people. If I
Or
did
people who
talk to
knew
her,
at least, right?
yeah, if I talk to her, it's not like in the front of my brain, because okay, here's what ends up happening a lot of the times, by the way, guys, when you're talking to these people, especially the older people, they have this attitude of like, I've talked about this so many times. I'm thankful for what the Lord's done for me, but I just want to move on, kind of a thing. Which is like really counterintuitive, I actually think, to what a lot of atheists and skeptics think about when it comes to miracle cases like this. They're going to be like, well, why aren't they talking about this nonstop and all this other stuff? And it's like, most of the time, most of the time people underreport these things. Most of the time people just like will get excited about it, but then they're going to be like, okay, well, my faith isn't just this miracle that happened to me. I
Right.
want to actually, you get the point. So a
Most
lot of
of
the
them
times,
don't. Yeah, go ahead, sorry.
I was just going to say, so a lot of the times, like that kind of stuff, that I get that type of reaction I'm talking to, like, especially older people. So if I did talk to her, it was one of those, and it
Sure.
just kind of got bucketed into like a no need for storage.
Yeah, sorry, that was just an aside from since you brought up Chris. But yeah, that's a good point. I actually have a whole Substack article if you look up Caleb Jackson, Blonde Theist on Substack about I think it's called Peer-Reviewed Miracles. And I actually go into that in the literature about how common it is for, like, because we ask why are these not published medical journals. Well, both of these cases, the one we just discussed and this one here, both are. But even the ones that are not, or some of them that often will be, but they won't be labeled as miracles, or the doctors will intentionally take out any religious aspect to it. So you'll have like these mysterious remissions that happen after prayer, but they don't mention it was after prayer, right? So if you were to read it, it would sound like any other like really strange anomaly. I only say that to say that like a lot of times these people are not going to be like super rigorously trying to get proof of their miracle. That's kind of these things that nerds like us do and people like GMRI do. But for the person who's healed, their personal experience is usually vindicatory enough for them. They don't need to prove it to people. They don't want to go through the process of getting tested again. Sometimes it does happen. And there are some cases where you do have really good evidence like the ones we're discussing here, but most people just are not like minded of like, I have to go prove this scientifically to share the gospel. They're sort of satisfied with just giving their own testimony and their own experiences. So that's why you don't have this super common idea of people just trying to get as much medical evidence as possible. And that's why it often flies under the radar. We're trying to do a better job of that, but sometimes that's what happens. So, all right. Anyway, with Chris Gunderson, So we interviewed Chris a few years ago, and this is also published in Medical Journal, which is where we're getting most of this information. So Chris was born on April 9th, same birthday as me. We're twins there. With idiopathic gastroparesis, which there's different kinds. Gastroparesis is paralysis of the stomach where the stomach doesn't drain into the intestine properly, the small intestine. And there's different kinds you can have. So there's like the main one is, I think, viral, which is where you get a disease that's acquired. So like you get a virus often or some other disease, and it, as a side effect, paralyzes your stomach. And those usually are temporary. So they go away after maybe a year or two. And you have idiopathic, which is where we don't know the cause of it. Probably some kind of neurological thing. We're not really sure. But that happens usually at birth, and it's not related to another disease, and that's permanent. So this one, Chris had idiopathic one. He didn't have any kind of discernible virus or anything that gave him this. So his stomach was paralyzed. He immediately was vomiting at a very young age, just at a few, I think, weeks or months old. And so they had to implant with him a G tube and a J tube. So one tube in his stomach would drain the contents out, because even when you're not eating, your stomach is producing acid and you're drinking water and stuff like that. And then the J tube would go into his small intestine. They would pump basically, I think the formula is what it's called, into his small intestine to get him nutrients. So it was basically like pre-digested stuff, nutrients. I mean, it's really gross, but he couldn't eat orally. At best, if they were out to dinner, he might like chew on some food and then spit it out, or he would chew on ice often. But he really couldn't eat much without like vomiting and get upset, because his stomach would just sit there and rot, I think is the term he used for us. And then he'd have to drain it out every night. So he had this for 16 years of his life. He was born with it. He still was very active. He played basketball, but when he had to get water, he would usually have to inject the water into one of the tubes. He couldn't always just drink it. So that was a big thing. But he has this for 16 years. We have multiple medical records and supplementary material. I don't know if we have pictures of that. Maybe we do, but if not, it's fine. Where he visits his gastroenterologist at different ages, and there's no improvement. So we can establish this is clearly a progressive disease, or at least not one that's improved at all, because this disease really can't. So he has this for his life. His parents go to a conference by a guy named Bruce Venata, who is, he has a ministry, but Bruce himself was actually healed in 2007 of he had, long story short, part of his small intestine removed, and it allegedly grew back, and there are scans of that and all that stuff. So he had a gastrointestinal miracle, right? So his parents are really impressed by Bruce's story, and they say, oh, well, our son has a paralyzed stomach. Could we bring him here tomorrow and you could pray for him? And Bruce is like, yeah, why not? So they bring Chris there. Chris is 16 years old. This is in 2011. And they both sort of show off their scars, right? Bruce is showing his scar on his abdomen from the surgery, and Chris has the insertions from the tubes. So they're praying for Chris to be healed. And as he's doing this, Chris feels sort of this electric heat in his stomach. And his mom says that she could even see the tube like vibrating a little bit, like there was almost like a current or a motion in there. So he felt really weird after that. As they're driving home, he wants to try to eat, right? And he actually feels hungry, I think, for the first time is how he described it, because they would usually just, again, the stomach wasn't working. So they go and get Chinese food and he eats all of that.
It's my favorite
Chinese
part
food is
of
also, and he's also not, Chinese food is not something you want
story.
to eat when you have a upset stomach either, right? Like it wouldn't be your first meal because that's something you got to be careful of because of all the GMOs, or not GMOs, all the
all the sodium, dude.
yeah,
When
yeah,
I was a
all
firefighter,
that
dude. When I was a
stuff.
firefighter,
Yeah.
we sometimes we would go to this place called Chen's, but like if we had reason to suspect that it was going to be a busy night, we would just be like, no, we can't go because of the Chen's revenge.
Oh gosh. Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. So not, yeah, no, they're good. So not always the stuff you want to take on an upset stomach, but he ate that with no problem. And so he continued to eat, and they still were doing the formula as well, just as a precaution, because you don't want to just quit it all instantly. So he was drinking the formula orally as well as in taking food, and having no issues, right? It still would be drained out of that. So his doctor, when they visit the doctor a few weeks later after that, they tell him, oh yeah, Chris has actually been eating orally again. We've had no issues. He's digesting it fine. And his doctor's pretty astonished by this. Like, that's unusual. And so she says, let's just keep a watch on it and have him keep eating and just, we'll see what happens. So he does this for a few more months and still has no issues. And so at that point, the doctor's like, okay, well, I guess we can take the tubes out. So he has a surgery, I think it's in 2012, where they take the G and the J tubes out. And normal sense. We interviewed him, I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years ago now. And that was, so it'd been about a decade. Yeah, a decade or more after he was healed. And he was, in his, I think 30s at that point. He had no issues. He told us he had no relapses. And the paper was published, I think, 7 or 8 years after he had been healed. So he has had no relapses that we know of. It was also a pretty serious condition too. I forgot to mention that, because most people with that condition have stunted growth and they don't always get nutrients. So he was expected to die into early adulthood, but obviously that he's cured now. He has kids now, a wife, he's in good health. So this is a pretty remarkable case of something that's like, that wouldn't normally go away, right? Because mind you, idiopathic gastroparesis is the long-term one. I think, Fan, didn't you have a call-in show? I forgot if it was you or if it was Testify, where a guy was like trying to push back on this one, and he was trying to give like maybe
together. Yeah.
Yes, that's right. It was you two together. Yeah. And from what he had said, I think he just was confused. I'd have to go rewatch what he exactly said, but I think he was confused about like functional versus not, something like that. But with this particular one, it does not just normally go away. And again, this is one where we don't have, to my knowledge, any case of gastroparesis lasting 16 years without improvement and then suddenly going away, right? Normally when this improves with viral kinds, it goes away within maybe 1 to 2 to 3 years at most. Idiopathic doesn't go away at all. So it's like, it's hard to find any precedent of that one. So you could say, well, maybe it just was this like weird outlier where just, he happened to get better this many years later. But I think we can say it was probably instantaneous, because another thing that people like Fedora want to say, I just want to address some of the objections here, is that maybe he did gradually get better and he just didn't realize it because they were still using the tubes and he wasn't trying to eat, right? And I think this is what the skeptic has to say, because I think if they're going to grant he immediately regained function of his intestines and stomach at the moment of prayer, that seems really hard to explain naturally. So you're going to say, well, the prayer was just coincidental and he'd already been better before that. So they're just denying the criteria progressive in this case. But I don't think that works, because he told us, and I think it mentioned in the paper, that his family was draining his tubes out every day, because he would have to have this feeding bag, like the tubes, draining overnight, because again, he would get stuff building up in his stomach just from acid and saliva and water and all that stuff. And so you'd have to drain every night. So like if you were able to digest food and stuff again, normally when he would eat food and it would sit in the bottom of his stomach, they would have to drain it out. Otherwise he'd vomit. So you would notice if the stomach was now emptying into the intestine, you'd have different bowel movements and all that kind of stuff. It wouldn't just be something you wouldn't notice, especially with stomach pains and stuff like that. So we have no precedent of this going away after this long of a period of time. There's no real mechanisms, because we don't really know why this happens in the first place, right? And we have no real evidence that he was getting better, because we know that he was visiting doctors throughout his life. No improvement was reported. And given the drainage thing, it's unlikely he wouldn't have noticed. So we have no real evidence to suggest this wasn't instantaneous. And I think the only reason we would suspect that is because that's more palatable under the natural view. And if you reject that and think it was instantaneous, it's very hard to explain naturally.
Yeah. I found the stream. Dude, we interviewed him 3 years ago together.
Wow. That's crazy.
3 years
before I had a beard too. Isn't that
Yeah,
wild?
it's before you could grow one.
Yeah, that was when my book was like in its like second year too. It was like an infancy too.
No, so
Impressive.
yeah, for anybody interested, if you want to watch a stream that Caleb and I did together where we actually interviewed Chris Gunderson 3 years ago, links in the chat if you want to go watch it. But yeah, so you kind of
I
already
think we
went
went over
over.
most of these already.
Yeah.
From that,
So,
yeah. So, yeah, we
why
could do
don't you
this
share
one.
your screen?
Yeah, let me
and
pull up these other ones. So
while you're pulling that up, I'll just go through some super chats quick. Or sorry, actually, there's two. So
it's okay.
a miracle is a miracle. What does the denomination matter? I may not be a member of the RCC, but their process for vetting miracles and their veracity is exhaustive and extensive. God bless you all in Jesus' name.
What a
Thank you.
great way to say that.
Caleb, thank you for the $1 super chat. All right. You pulling up which one are you gonna go over?
Emma McKinley, the one that you had the slide for.
Oh, nice.
I just have
We're
pictures,
so-
so we
we're
can
so-
just do
we're so
my
cute.
slides, aren't we? We can just do my slides because they're more decorative. But actually, yours are pretty good. I like the format you have in yours.
Oh, it's the Inspiring Philosophy Academy, like
Oh, so you just
aesthetic.
plagiarized it. I see. I like the colors. Yeah, I do.
Inspiring Philosophy Academy is. What did you say? Plagiarize?
I was messing.
I want to fight you. so
Plagiarize,
bad.
even though it's yourself. Yeah. Yeah.
All right,
right.
go for it.
So Emma McKinley, this is one we went over on one of Cameron's streams, but I still have the slides for. So this one I think is a really interesting case. Craig Keener mentions it relatively briefly, but I'm going to some of the more of the medical stuff. So Emma McKinley was injured. I believe she was middle-aged at the time in 1993. I want to say early 90s. In a work accident. So she was working, I think it was in a warehouse or some kind of retail store, and she fell off of a ladder. And when her coworkers found her, she was hanging, her foot was still attached to one end of the ladder, but she was swinging from it, like basically unconscious, and had like severely hurt it. So she was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy. There's other terms for it now, like CRPS, I think is the more natural one, a more modern one. But basically, this is a very, it's one of the most painful diseases you can possibly get. It's absolutely miserable. So basically, whenever you hurt yourself, obviously your body emits pain as a warning sign, right? RSD basically is when it causes either tissue damage or nerve damage. Your pain receptors are completely dysfunctional, where it's just constantly giving you pain, even if there's no like further damage there. So your body's just overdoing just pain receptors constantly. So it's really miserable. And people who have chronic conditions, right? Sometimes you have acute versions that go away gradually over like a few months, but chronic conditions where it's lifelong often lead to severe disability. And it's also a very common disease. People commit suicide because it's just so miserable. So very sad situation. So she got a lot of workers' comp from this because she was she was so badly injured and was basically considered to be disabled by the government. So I don't have all the quotes from her doctors in this slide, but she essentially had you can see these red marks on her, and she had a club foot where it was twisted from all that. So this causes discoloration of the skin pretty frequently and marks on it. Again, she was mostly bound to a wheelchair. She also had a very noticeable disorder where she was leaning on her side. So as this happened, I think it just was her back pain. There's a scan of her spine right there. I think the nerves in her back basically just contorted. If you've seen when people sometimes they get like they'll have their hands contort or something like that with certain nerve injuries, she was basically contorted like this. So her right fist was stuck in a permanent closure mark. Her left foot, I believe it was, or sorry, maybe it was her left fist. Actually, look at the picture. Left fist was like that. Her left foot was bent in a club foot like that. And then her back was basically bent like that. So she was primarily like this for, I think it was at least 10 or 15 years. So you can imagine from 1993 to 2011. I don't think she actually got into this position until like a few years later. So like maybe 1995, 1996. So she gradually got worse and then stayed in this position. But you can imagine how miserable this was. She also was on like thousands of milligrams. I think it was maybe up to 1,000, 2,000 milligrams or whatever the contortion was of medication of like opioids or I guess morphine or whatever the equivalent was back then. Basically the top amount of painkillers that you can legally be on without overdosing because of how miserable this was. So you can just imagine how severe this whole situation was for her. So I'm sorry, if you had a comment after that or not.
No. This is just one of those really cool cases to me, man.
Yeah, no, it's actually, this also one is that gets me emotionally. That doesn't normally happen, but it's very heartbreaking. So I believe it was December 24th of 2011. So Christmas Eve. So Christmas miracle, literally. She's home by herself. Her family's going to come over and visit her later that afternoon for, dinner or whatever. But she's at her computer at her desk, and she tries to pull out of her wheelchair, and I think her wheelchair gets stuck on one of the rungs of the desk or like of the chair, and she keeps doing it, and she basically falls out of her wheelchair onto the ground, obviously in horrible pain, and she can't get up because she's half paralyzed essentially. And so she's lying there on the ground crying for hours. I think she says she thinks it was like 8 hours. I don't know how accurate that perception was, but she's crying miserable for hours. Obviously her family's not there. You just feel so bad for this poor lady who's just lying there out of her wheelchair on the ground, like sprawled out, crying in pain. She then claims that through the tears, she looks up and she says who she perceives at least to be Jesus, right? Walking towards her. He's radiant and glowing that. And she literally claims, and again, it sounds incredible, that Jesus picks her up by her arm and she starts to stiffen up, and he literally takes her fist and like pries it open like that. Yep. And her back straightens too. So she does that. She's off the floor. Her family then comes there and she answers the door for them, like standing up. And her daughter is like shocked. And she's not like running around, like she's having to like take baby steps, right? Because she's still like regaining her balance. She hasn't walked in that decade or so. She has some muscle atrophy. She's taking baby steps and being very careful about it. But she can move her hands now. She can move her legs. Her pain severely reduced. This is a record from Mayo Clinic when she was looked at by a doctor. I think it was a few weeks after that. This is in February. I think she was also viewed in January too. So this is like a fault from that. But her doctor actually mentions that she has like a remarkable recovery after acclaimed religious vision. I think extraordinary recovery is literally the word that he's using there. She feels that God has healed her. He says she's maintained improvement since Christmas. He talks about her doctor and stuff like that. She saw another doctor in January. So her doctor is basically attested to that, like now she has dexterity in her hand. Now she can walk again. Her pain's reduced. It did take her a little bit to get off the pain medication because of just how addicting that stuff can be and to wean that off. So I think it was the year after that's when she was completely off of it, or in that sense. So she gradually got better, but this would be instantaneous in the sense that the onset of her recovery happened right when the vision happened, right? It's not like she got better like 2 months after that. Like she was already improving at the moment of the miracle, and then everything else was just on top of the improvement that already happened. So this is clearly a remarkable case where you have someone with a very severe disease that's, mind you, very visibly obvious, right? I don't think you could say this was psychosomatic or like, and that we clearly have like she was disabled and bending down, all that stuff. So it's something that any person with eyes can see that, oh, this person's sick. You have this happen for almost 20 years. I think it was 18 years. It was 1993 to 2011, which is crazy. She has this there. It's a progressive disease, horrible, not something that would normally go away after that long period of time, right? Once it's chronic, it's not going to permanently go away. She has a vision of Jesus. We can't prove that the vision of Jesus was real, but we can prove that she immediately had a dramatic resolution of symptoms after that. So hard for me to explain how that would happen if that was purely psychological. And she's maintained this up to the present day. So over 15 years later, which is pretty crazy. Sorry, I have a phone call coming in real fast.
You're good.
So that's remarkable, I think. And so I really don't know. If we're going to go through like the list here, I don't think this is psychological. Again, she was clearly on disability, and all of our doctors agreed this was an organic condition. I don't think spontaneous remission makes any sense with the timing of this. That just happened to get lucky with that. It was clearly a progressive disease. I just don't know what one's going to say here unless they just posit some crazy coincidence of her hallucinating and then that affecting her body in such a way where psychologically she'd feel better. But I don't know. So it's very hard to really assess that.
And the one of the things that is publicly accessible too is the court documents for her disability or workman's comp with Target, because it was Target that she worked with.
That's right. I think you found that, didn't you? Because I don't even remember showing that was. Oh, that's cool. Well, you need to send those to me because I appreciate that. Yeah, I know that is. This is.
Yeah, I'll just send it to you. I'll send it to you now.
Awesome. Yeah, please do.
Yeah, you guys can actually go look that up yourself.
Because it was like a lawsuit, right?
Yeah. 1 sec.
Yeah, and her doctors. I also have other doctors' quotes. If you look up, I forget who it is. I think Lons is his last name, but British for Honest Skeptics. He has a chapter or section of a chapter on her, and he has direct quotations from many of her doctors. This is from a different book where I got this one from Mayo Clinic, but it's pretty. They can give you all the names of her doctors, the dates when she was examined, their notes, all that stuff. So it's pretty well documented, and something that would be pretty hard to explain. Thank you.
Yeah, If you guys just look up McKinley versus Target Corporation, 2016 from Minnesota, you guys should be able to find it.
2016, you said?
Yeah.
What
For
is
the
it for?
Court
I
of
mean,
Appeals.
oh, Court of Appeals. I'm sure the other one would have been earlier because she was injured in the 90s and she was already healed by 2011. So it might be.
Yeah. No, it goes through the background and everything. So it
Oh,
goes
okay.
through from 1993 all the way through.
Cool.
Yeah, you get the point.
That's cool. Yeah, that's nice. I have another one on here that's not on this, if you don't mind.
Yeah, go
That's
ahead.
kind of similar to this one. I think that's cool. Let me pull up this.
Which, by the way, like I think is actually really strong evidence when you have money involved, like corporations and money involved. Like,
yeah,
you think Target's gonna?
yeah, Target's just gonna let her malinger. Like clearly, like she was disabled. If Target's willing to pay a lot of money to settle this, it's like.
Yo, okay, this isn't a super chat, but I'm just saying it because this guy's not a theist. In my opinion, this should generally be enough to make someone a tentative supernaturalist. Koopa, you are based.
Wow,
why I
that's
like you.
actually very based. I'll take it. We always have to do it. This is another cool one. I don't know if I've shared. I think maybe I've shared this one to Than before. I don't know. Sometimes I do these improvising, and Than may or may not have discussed these. So sometimes it's nice to see people get reactions with this in real time. I think that's always cool. So
I know everything.
if I have a video on here, by the way, is it going to have audio?
You have to set it up so it gives audio. So like when you share the screen, depending on what you're sharing.
Okay, let me see. I see. Also share audio tab.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let me see if this works because this one actually is partially on film. So, okay. All right. So this one is another one of a wheelchair, but different disease. So this is Bill Kent. Bill was.
Dude, it's been a while since I heard this one.
Yeah, this one's cool. So Bill was injured in 1985 in a motorcycle accident. Very nasty. I believe he was hit by a train. I don't know if he was speeding and didn't see it or what, but he ended up having optic nerve damage, and I think it was his right eye. Yeah, from that you can see the eye patch on there. Complete paralysis on, I believe, one of his hands. Oh, so the right side of his body. So his right hand completely paralyzed, both legs completely paralyzed. Yeah, right side body. So I'm bringing that right. So, partial paralysis on the side, both legs, and optic nerve damage. So the cool thing about Bill's too is that his is very public in terms of his thing. So he actually became a Paralympian after this. So you can look up right now Bill Kent in the Paralympics in 1988 in Seoul, South Korea. And there's plenty of newspapers here. So he actually was a professional marksman, like a rifleman. So he would be shooting targets like that for disabled athletics. And actually he got moved. I found one newspaper clipping one time that mentioned that originally he was in the paraplegics and they had to move him back to the quadriplegics. Paraplegia is when you have just the legs paralyzed, and quadriplegia is when you have the legs and like one or both hands paralyzed. So he actually was more disabled than they thought. So they actually had to move him back to one of the rankings to make it fair that way. But he was very successful. He won gold. Again, anyone can look this up in terms of his record. There's plenty of newspapers that show this. So there's no denying that this guy was really disabled. And it seems very implausible to me that someone would be able to fake this, or that there'd be like a very a misdiagnosis to the point to where, because obviously to be a Paralympian, you have to have a lot of medical they're not going to let anyone pretend to be disabled to get in, right? So you get examinations, all that to determine your class and all that stuff. So I think it's pretty safe to say that he was certifiably disabled. And someone with that kind of condition where you're like completely paralyzed in the legs and hand, that's not something that's just going to improve, right? So we have newspapers and accounts of him all the way up throughout the 90s. We know that in the mid-90s, he had a service dog named Baron, which was a Dalmatian. There's a newspaper article talking about him getting that. I think he also had diabetes too, if I'm remembering correctly. So this guy is clearly very severely injured. But one day, I believe he was watching a television program, and I think was in Maryland is where he's from originally. And there was some pastor out there in Ohio. So he wants to go to this conference and basically ask for prayer. So he has to get a car. He has to get people to drive him there. It's a whole process. He eventually gets there. And this is November 20th of 2000. So I'm sorry, November 11th of 2000. I'm wrong. So mind you that, remember, he'd been paralyzed since 1985. So it's been 15 years, right? Completely no use of legs. I also have his written testimony in another spot too, where he basically talks about how during the conference, I don't think someone went up and prayed for him. I think they were praying for someone else on stage. And while he's watching the audience, he feels like a heat in his legs, which is weird because he didn't even have any feeling in his legs. And he like jumps out of his wheelchair and he's like astonished by this. And so he's moving around and the ushers notice this and they're like, what's going on? And so that's the moment where this part is on film. You can see it. Let me know if you can't hear this. So I'm going to assume that you can, unless you say otherwise.
We about plumb forgot about you. Sorry. How long have you been in that wheelchair?
Since 1985.
Since 19...
Monday, the 13th of May, 1985 at 8:05 in the morning.
You got hit by a train?
Yes.
And you've been in that wheelchair ever since?
Yes.
Come here.
Somebody cry out!
I'm just crazy enough to ask. Who's that? Oh, that's his dog. It assisted him getting around. Will it bite me if I pet him? What's his name? What's his name?
His name is Baron.
Hey, Baron. Yeah. Hey, Baron. I'm glad you're his friend, because if it was just for a job, you'd be out of job, Baron.
So I can't see the look on your face right now because of the show, but I thought that was pretty cool. So, you have this like capture on video, this long history, right, of paralysis that seems like public and verifiable. His doctors also wrote this, and I don't have the exact like documentation for this. Sid Roth, who was interviewing him, brings it out and starts to read off of it. Unfortunately, I don't have pictures of it. Now, I'm not saying that I trust everything Sid Roth says. He is a bit, he's definitely charismatic, and he has some guests that are questionable. But in this case, I think it's nice that you can actually go and verify most of the history behind this. You can look up and see his history as an Olympian, and also that applies to it afterwards too. So I also was able to find, this was in 2009, so 9 years after he was healed, newspapers talking about how he's a chaplain now at a fire department, and obviously he's standing in that picture. And that newspaper mentions how he was healed, 50 and a half years in a motorcycle. He's able to walk again. And, he didn't have a wheelchair, any kind of canes, anything like that when he's working for the fire department. So pretty cool that you have like pre and post ones of verifying this, of a disease that like obviously is not going to just, I think we all know that like severe paraplegia is not going to get better. And of course, you have people who go to faith healing conferences who are in wheelchairs, who are not really paralyzed. So just because it's on video does not automatically mean it's credible. But all of that together with the history as a Paralympian, that seems pretty hard to fake. I'm not aware of any case where someone's like pretended to be a Paralympian for that many years or whatever and had a recovery like that. So
I feel like one, you have to be a really, really, really crappy person to fake being a Paralympian.
I mean, you do.
I don't know many people whose conscience could handle that.
It just seems it's also horribly inconvenient for like that long. And like, even when you're not in the Paralympics, like in the 90s, he was retired from the Paralympics and he was still doing it for whatever reason. Like,
yeah, I was gonna say, I also just don't know how you would like fake it and not get caught for that long.
Yeah, especially when they have to like verify like your disabilities and stuff like that. Like, it's not like you're not going to have like someone just sitting in a wheelchair but pretending they can't walk. Like you can see atrophy in the legs. If you're like actually completely paralyzed, you're not going to have like super nice calves or thighs, right? Like you get it. Like you're not sticks your legs, and that's like, I think that's common knowledge. So you can normally tell just by looking if someone's like genuinely can't move their legs versus like they're just, they have a bad back and they just use a wheelchair for comfort. So all that's being there, but I think all that evidence cumulatively, again, we have other cases of wheelchair ones like Emma McKinley too. It's starting to stack up, and I genuinely don't know what like the explanation is, other than to say that all these people are lying or some weird medical anomaly or something like that. But it's hard to come up with something that's not super ad hoc, in my opinion.
Yeah. All right, we got some super chats we're going to take care of real quick here, just to keep up with them. That's all. Than is Bay. That's why it's called Bayesian analysis. Stop it, you. Stop.
Than, you said your wife calls you Bay because of that. She loves when you talk Bayesian to her. Isn't that what I think you?
My wife does not care at all about my dorky math stuff.
Do you know what Bayes' theorem is?
She knows Bayes' theorem based off of this book I have for my kids that I read to them about doing Bayes. So I have a Bayes' theorem book for Bayesian probability stuff for kids, and it uses cookies. So the only thing that she knows about Bayes is cookies.
That's good. That's probably all one needs to know, to be honest, in most cases. But I do like cookies.
The Real Espada says, thoughts on RCTs to study of prayer on illness. can be controlled for other religions, pseudosciences like homeopathy and placebo.
So I think he's talking about randomized controlled trials is what that is. So that's when you're testing a drug, right? Normally they have randomized controlled trials where you have blinding and you give one group, you have your experimental group and your control group. You give one of them the actual medicine, one of them a sham medicine like a placebo, and they're randomized. You control for all this stuff like that. And you see which ones improve, right? If the placebo group does as well as the experimental group, it probably isn't effective. And that's how you determine that, right? So there have been studies like that done on prayer, and they've had very mixed results. Some of them show improvement, some of them show no improvement, some of them show slightly worse improvement than the ones that are prayed for. There's a very famous 2006 study on that people like to cite that shows like prayer fails. I don't think RCTs are a very good model for studying prayer because I think it requires a sense of, I think there's two main problems. One is it requires divine psychology. God's not signing off on the experiment where you can predict ahead of time God's going to heal these people or not, right? Even if you're a theist, you don't think that God heals everyone when they're prayed for. That's just obvious. There's different theodicy reasons, different hiddenness reasons, and soul building and all that stuff like that we could get into. But I don't think theism predicts that every sincere prayer is going to get answered, right?
Yeah,
so
we would sooner think if we would sooner think if we can predict things on a deterministic scale for people to get healed under prayer conditions, we would sooner think that this is actually going to be a naturalistic explanation than a theistic one.
You could repeat it every time, yeah. Of course. So that's one issue I would have. Another one, actually, Swinburne brings this up too, is a sincerity aspect where if you're doing this just to test for it, it might not actually be a sincere prayer. I think Swinburne had that where it's not like you're being legitimate, your motives are bad. But I think an actual methodological concern as well is how do you control for background prayers? How do you, for the group that prays for and the group that is not prayed for, how do you make sure that the control group that's not prayed for, they're not praying for themselves, their family isn't praying for them? You couldn't possibly roll that someone across the world is praying for like everyone to be healed or whatever. Like you couldn't possibly control for that. So you can't control for background prayers and guarantee that the no prayer group is actually getting no prayer, right? So I think for all those reasons, you really just can't have this be substantial. I do think that case studies are the best way to go about this because case studies are what we use in medicine for rare and sort of anomalous things that can't easily be replicated. It might be a rare disease. It might be a very specific combination of ailments. It might be a particular injury. It might be a case where you just can't like ethically replicate it. Like there was one of a kid who had a junk food diet that basically made him go blind. That was the hypothesis. And obviously you can't give like a bunch of volunteers really bad diets and hope they go blind and see what happens, right? Like, so the way that you test that is with just the case study. You couldn't ethically replicate that. So I think that because prayers can be unpredictable in that kind of way, that's the best way you go about it. And that's the way it's been studied for hundreds of years at like Lourdes and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but I don't think that that's much of an issue though, because again, we have examples of this in medicine, and you have controlled conditions in the sense that the pre and post conditions are controlled for. It's true that the healing, like the moment of healing, is not controlled for. That's true. But I don't think you need that, because if you have controlled conditions to establish the diagnosis and this is repeated, they go to the doctor. Again, look at like Chris Gunderson, for example. They go to the doctor many times over many years. Check up, yep, they're sick. Check up, yep, they're sick. Check up, yep, they're sick. No improvement. Then they're healed. They claim they're healed. Okay, that's their testimony. They come back. We test. Seems like they're cured. We test them again 2 years later. Seems like they're still cured. Test them again a year. So you can repeat under controlled conditions the actual disease when they're sick and when they're cured, right? It's just that moment of healing. But if you can establish those two facts of they really were sick and they really were healed, I don't think that little leap of, but we have to take their testimony here is like that big of a stretch, right? Because again, in many of these cases, just really implausible that they just gradually got better in that tiny span of time when you weren't testing them, you know? Last thing I'll say too is that RCTs are good for populations, but they're not really good for individuals. Yeah. And so I don't think that you can say like chance explains it. I gave this example to Fan the other day when we were talking, but like imagine you have a drug that has 100 test subjects, right? And in 98 cases, this test subjects showed improvement of whatever disease that it was after they took the drug. In 2 cases, that immediately after taking it, or we'll say within 20 minutes after taking the drug, 2 patients had a very severe skin rash and then a seizure. They were foaming at the mouth. And neither patient had epilepsy prior to this or any other conditions that were tested for. So you could say, okay, I think we could mirror this to be just like the prayer example. You could say, okay, fine. I grant to you that in most cases, people did not develop a seizure or a rash with this, right? You can say in 98% of cases, 98% of the time out of the 100, they didn't. That doesn't mean that you can say, therefore, these 2 cases where these people had very similar symptoms, we can just say, well, the drug couldn't have possibly have caused that because look at the 98 that didn't get that. right? It's like, well, no, there might be different genetic components. There might be things we just don't know about underlying, right? People have different reactions, different immune systems. All that stuff could be qualified, right? Just like you could say, well, there might be different elements of faith. There might be different things in God's providence. We don't really know. But the fact that we don't have a really solid answer for why these specific people developed this and the other ones didn't doesn't mean that you can conclude that you can't possibly say the drug didn't have an effect on it, right? If the effects were very severe and were very closely timed with when they took the drug, and they clearly didn't have this before, and there's no like plausible mechanism for how they would have gotten this outside the drug, it seems like we can very plausibly infer to say, okay, these people really did get sick because they took this drug, and that's what caused these symptoms. In the same way, you can say that even though most people who are prayed for are not healed, the fact that this person immediately got dramatically better in a way that's not easily explainable right after being prayed for, we can infer the cause to that is prayer. So I think you can make a one-to-one analogy with that pretty closely, actually. And that's why I think that the case study approach is just methodologically more sound.
Based. All right. You
Based.
have one more.
B-A-Y-E,
You have one more?
Steve. Oh, case.
Or did you want to go over
Well, you had the Stirs, and I think you had Georgia War, right? So
yeah, we're already at an hour 30. So
that's fine. Let's just do the Stirs one just to as like the final one, I think, because that one's kind of unique. Actually, I have do you mind if we use my slides? I think I have more pictures. Okay, because I have that one on the same slide.
yeah, I don't have too many pictures on any of my slides because I also use these.
Just has no room.
like,
You
talks that I give.
You like boring words, and you have no room for aesthetics. I feel like that's what it is. You know, I'm kidding.
Can't wait to see you in person again so I can fight you.
Yeah. By the way, guys, if you're wondering, Fan's actually like 5'7". He's like way shorter than you think he would be. So he's not as
wide.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in muscle or in something else. We'll see. But okay. So I'm kidding. You could pinch me in half, so I really can't say much about that. Just snap me.
I'm just messing with you.
I'd be like 150 pounds. You'd destroy me. All right. So all right. So Stirs. This is the last one. This is the only case I know where there's a double miracle. I think you actually alluded to this one earlier. So people were wondering the full context, right? Cameron and Caden Stirs, both kids from Iowa. I believe Cameron is like 3 years older than Caden is.
Where'd you get that doc?
I think this was a screenshot from one of their from one of like the documentaries or something they were on. I'd have to double check it.
Send it over to me.
Pretty cool. Yeah, I definitely can. Anyway, so Cameron and Caden both had developed severe symptoms where I think they were on the floor just crying in pain and stomach pain constantly, and they were vomiting, so they had a lot of food intolerance. And there were lots and lots of tests done. I think it was originally at in Iowa's Children's Hospital, and they thought it was glycogen storage disease, which is kind of similar to diabetes in the sense that it's like a failure of the body to process glucose and sugar, right? So just how diabetics have issues with insulin, it's like that, but with glucose for them. And so they were admitted to the University of Florida, which has a whole research program. So they were basically being tested on for 2 years between 2011 and 2013, but their condition didn't get better. So they were on a very strict diet, as you can imagine. These are both, I think that they were like 8 and maybe 5 at this point. They were on a cornstarch diet of 90 grams every single day. Their blood sugar was measured 4 times every day to measure it because it's highly unstable. And so this is also something that normally people don't live very long with. So people with this disease, at least the serious cases of it, often like die in like their mid-20s or 30s. So they don't typically live like a really long life because it's just hard to manage and the body fails over time from lack of nutrients. So they were Make-A-Wish kids. They were given not super long to live. There wasn't a hard deadline, but they were told to just start making memories of them because the doctors did not expect they were going to live super long. So Fan, I know, has pictures of them as Make-A-Wish kids, where they were raising money to help study for all this stuff like that. So here's some pictures of them in the hospital. You can see that scan there. In 2013, Cameron had an issue with his spleen where it was doubling, and he had cirrhosis, which is where the liver starts to scar over. It's like what equivalent to basically what severe alcoholics have, because the lack of glucose, I think, was just damaging the liver. And Caden had to have a feeding tube because he became more orally intolerant. So they both developed this in the early 2010s, right? By 2013, even though their starch intake is upped, their condition is getting worse. Cameron's getting spleen issues and liver issues. Caden's getting intolerance issues. So by fall of 2013, their condition's gotten much more worse and considered to be, close to fatal at this point. Both boys, however, go in January of 2014. their mom, who's very religious and devout, takes them to a service in Illinois where hands are laid on them and they're prayed for. And at that point, both boys said they could feel the disease leaving their body. That's the way they said that. The next day, they do blood tests. And I believe Cameron's came back almost completely normal. And Caden's had significantly improved. And their nurse was shocked by this. This was the first time it had really been stable. And so they both decided to gradually start taking them off the cornstarch feeding. So within a month, Cameron's off of it. They just start to deplete it. In March, after he's been off of it for about a month, still no issues. He hasn't had any kind of relapse, and the spleen's normal. Caden's blood work had improved significantly as well, but because he was a lot younger than Cameron was, they were a bit more cautious with taking him off. So he stayed on his diet for a few more months, but he continued to improve. And then on October of that year, they finally removed his feeding tube and stopped his feedings with that. So both boys now live, so far as I know, in completely normal health. They were interviewed years later. Their doctor agreed that this was like medically inexplicable. Because mind you, this is a genetic condition. So this is not something that would typically just, resolve on its own. Normally at best, you can stabilize it depending on your diet, like how diabetics can do, but it wouldn't just resolve on its own typically. And of course, mind you, this happened instantaneously or rapidly right after they were prayed for is when the improvement happened. And it happened to both boys, and they're not twins. So they're couple years apart. So I don't know how the bodies would react at the same time in the same way when you're multiple years apart, even given that they're brothers, right? So it's a double miracle where you have people who are healed at the same time with the same condition. So that's pretty remarkable. And I don't know how you would balance that out as a naturalist. But I've been saying that a lot throughout this entire stream. So you're just kind of, and even if you think that one of those is like an anomaly, and okay, maybe we can't explain that one, you get dozens and dozens and dozens of these, which we're trying to do through this project and through the book. And after a while, it just kind of becomes overwhelming, or like, what do I do with all of these religiously anomalous healings that seem to defy how we understand medicine? So
Awesome. All right. Is there anything else you want to cover, Caleb? Because
I don't know. Are we done with are we done with super chats and all that?
There's one more. I was gonna close this out afterwards, unless there's anything else you want to do.
I don't know. I guess we can briefly. Do you want to briefly just say, I guess, since I've been talking a lot, like inferentially, if someone gives you the objection about why do we have to say it's God? Why can't we just say we don't know? Why are you doing a God at the gaps? I guess, like, what would be your sort of Bayesian methodological, or even just your lay way of?
I mean, at the end of the day, I don't know isn't an explanation. Like,
right. Okay. But suppose they say how
I'm gonna separate the claims, right?
Yeah.
There's the what's the best explanation claim, and then there's the what are you convinced of question, right?
Right.
If you want to sit here and just go, well, I'm going to suspend judgment, well, that's a you problem, not a me problem.
Yeah.
Right.
And you could ask why too. It's like, okay, but like why what's wrong with my hypothesis? And like, it's fine if you think that all the hypotheses are like problematic, but you have to, what's the defeater for mine? Like, why are you hesitant to accept the supernatural?
Yeah, exactly.
Hypothesis? Yeah. And maybe
and most of that's just going to come down to background knowledge problems, like people with problem of evil, divine hiddenness, or probably most of the time, not even evidential problems that they have. It's probably just going to be more sociological problems that they might have with Christianity.
Right.
So
it's true, but again,
person.
No, it definitely does. But like, again, it feels like if we're balancing like hard empirical data with theological speculations about like why God might or may not like intervene with evil. Like I understand that there's tension with both, but both sides have that issue. And I think that the issue is bigger on the other side, right? Like I grant that I can't explain like, why doesn't God heal everyone? I mean, I think I can broadly explain it with like theodicies, right? But like why was this particular person healed? You know, I can't answer that. So sure, that's like one anomaly in my theory. But at the same time, I think that the bigger anomaly is why would this person be healed under naturalism in the way that they were, like in this religious context? And I think that the answers for both of those are going to be less ad hoc for the theist. I think the theist can come up with non-silly answers about soul building or free will or greater goods or whatever. And it's speculative, but it's not like horribly ad hoc. Like there's plenty of philosophy that's plausible. But to come up with like, there's a natural law that seems inconsistent with what we know about like human neurology, about how nerve endings work, and it happens because you're in this meditative state of prayer, and it only happened in a religious context in this way. Like it's going to be something that's so speculative and like violates our best theories of the human body versus these sort of more theological things that we really shouldn't be confident that we should be able to know, you know? So I feel like which one has the more ad hoc auxiliary hypotheses? And I think the naturalist one doesn't.
Well, on top of that too, most of the time people don't actually know what ad hoc even means. And they don't understand that just because something is ad hoc, even if it is, that even still isn't necessarily a bad thing. So there's a bunch of dorky philosophical probability stuff that's there, but yeah.
Well, okay. Last one. What about on top of that, when people say, okay, even if I don't know, naturalism has, this is Paul Draper's thing, has a history of success. We've looked at lightning. We thought it was Thor, and we proved it was that. So like when we don't know, we should play it safe and infer a natural cause, even if we don't know it yet, because naturalism just has a better track record. What would you say about that?
Yeah, I would just say that's kind of a naive, like inductive argument at the end of the day. Because it also just depends too, because you're kind of conflating different categories of miracles too. So like if you're gonna say the success of naturalism, well, the amount of times naturalism is successful, quote unquote, in relation to like somebody calling it a miracle when they find their keys, or saying thunder is like from the divine or something like that, right? Well, I would just argue those aren't even categorically within the same type of observation or data that we're working with in the first place. So it's got like two problems at the same time there.
Yeah, one of them is you're just inferring a supernatural cause after the fact when it's like a repetitive thing, versus like I'm praying and predicting this is going to happen and it does, which seems much more religiously significant. So, all right. Well, I appreciate that. I know you probably want to wrap it up here, but this was fun.
Yeah. So somebody just says, can't experiment on people. We stopped in the 80s. Unfortunately, man. All right, Caleb. Do me a favor. After this, shoot me just kind of a link with all your stuff. So that way people can go, I'll just pin it in a comment or something. So that way people can go look at your work. Cool. And then we'll have you on in another time too, to go over some more cases. Because
we'll
I'm not going to stop talking about miracles. I'm just going to keep bludgeoning people. Say what?
So we can just keep promoting the book until it comes out in like 2035 or whenever it's going to be now.
Yeah.
Okay, hopefully it's not that long, but it's just, so we'll see. But I appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on, Caleb. I'll see you guys Thursday. God bless.
You made it to the end of this video, which means this message matters to you. If you want to see more content like this reaching people for Christ, you can help make it happen. Your support makes these videos possible. Click the link below and donate today. And if you want to go even deeper, consider joining our Patreon community. You'll get early access to videos, behind-the-scenes content, and a place to connect with others passionate about this mission.